The very first long-range box office forecasts for the opening weekend and the entire run of Black Panther 2: Wakanda Forever are out. And we're going to discuss them because that opening weekend as of right now looks to stand at somewhere around $200 million, if you can believe it. But let's talk about that because we have a lot of mathematical history now with Marvel, particularly in Phase 4, that things don't always quite seem to shake out as planned. Let's get into it. Renegade Online. Well, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's great to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment, hit that little red subscribe button and turn it gray if you haven't done that already. Please make sure you hit the like button on this video, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, do leave a comment below the video before you head out the door today. So we have this new piece today from Box Office Pro, which is a long-range box office tracking and forecasting website. And sometimes the information can be very accurate. Other times it can be a little bit off. But as with anything this far out, a month in advance, in this case of a movie's actual release, the numbers are, of course, subject to change. Let's take a look at the article. Long-range box office forecast, Black Panther Wakanda Forever tracking for a potential November record debut of 180 million plus. One of 2022's most anticipated films has finally hit theaters in 4 weeks, and legions of Marvel fans are expected to turn out in blockbuster numbers once again. Let's take a look at some of the particulars here they have listed as pros and cons for their projection system. The first Black Panther was a phenomenon in every sense of the word, demolishing President's Day weekend and February records with a $202 million domestic bow. The film went on to earn about $700 million domestically and $1.35 billion worldwide. Now, the first part that should jump out at you is that the first movie back in 2018 also pulled in about a $200 million opening weekend. And of course, we've had ticket price inflation since then, which, as we will see in a moment, this article does take into account, although they do miss a couple of key points that we're going to address. Now, one of the things that they're noticing here that is driving their projections higher is that pre-sales have been strong since the beginning, over a week and a half ago, pacing alongside the recent Thor: Love and Thunder. And an encouraging sign since Wakanda Forever's sales cycle began much earlier in the marketing window, 39 days of ticket pre-sales before release versus Thor: Love and Thunder's 25 days pre-release ticket sales. As a fall release, Wakanda may also prove somewhat less front-loaded to Thursday previews. Now that part I'm not so sure about because I don't think it's just simply about being a summer blockbuster or a late spring blockbuster like, for example, where we had Doctor Strange 2 rack up about $187 million in its opening weekend and then barely made it to a 2x threshold over the next 45 days before it got to Disney+. Thor: Love and Thunder certainly had a better leg out, but it also started with about $40 million less on opening weekend than did Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I don't think this is something that is just, strictly speaking, a summer issue, because we saw with Top Gun how well a very good movie is received and how well a very good movie can leg out. Now, Top Gun Maverick didn't quite come in at $147 million or $187 million like the most recent Marvel pictures did. But it did open with a solid $120+ million weekend, which is nothing to shake a stick at. And it managed to leg out to over $700 million from there. In fact, it dethroned the original 2018 Black Panther film as the number 5 domestic, unadjusted for inflation, grossing film of all time. And the next two sections. As seen throughout the theatrical recovery era over the past year, audiences are ready and willing to show up for major event films. The drought of must-see tentpole releases since summer should again create some pent-up demand among casual patrons. As far as Die Hard goes, that's one big question, is how many Die Hard Marvel fans really are still out there. We have tracked the performances of these Marvel shows on Disney+, and they have been, quite frankly, mediocre to poor at best when it comes to viewership and audience retention and bringing in new people to Disney+. The movies themselves, while it looks on paper like a Thor Love and Thunder has done fairly well, bringing in about $750 million worldwide, the problem is that they barely managed to break even on their costs, if they even broke even at all. Not to mention the fact that was with sharply higher ticket prices than the last Thor film, which Box Office Pro brings up in the next section. Average ticket prices are an estimated 23% higher in Q4 2022 than when the first Black Panther movie opened in February of 2018, providing some statistical indication for box office potential, alongside its position as the only true tentpole release in theaters before Avatar: The Way of the Water. More on that 1 month from now. Now let's talk about that 23% figure. Even if that does come from the National Association of Theater Owners, there is something that needs to be taken into account. You see, that is an average of all ticket prices sold. While that's a good metric to give us a year-to-year comparison, for a given film, depending on the type of the film, we can actually apply some additional metrics. One of the things that we know is that variable ticket pricing has become far more predominant in 2022 than the last time a Black Panther movie was released in 2018. Matter of fact, AMC Theaters, if you recall, announced their foray into variable ticket pricing back in February of this year. The first film to receive the variable ticket pricing was The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson from Warner Brothers Pictures. Now, what variable ticket pricing means is that if you're going to go see a big headline tentpole film like The Batman, or Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Thor: Love and Thunder, Top Gun, Black Panther now coming out, Wakanda Forever, you're going to pay an additional premium above and beyond the normal ticket price for that particular film, particularly on opening weekend, and a potentially even higher premium for seeing it during prime time in the evenings, 5 o'clock or later, when most movie theaters jump their ticket prices from the daytime price to the nighttime price. So that also includes, in that 23% average, a lot of films like Minions: The Rise of Gru, most recently as a kids movie that was very successful. Now, those movies usually come with, on average, much lower ticket prices, 15 to 20% average ticket price, lower than the average film, because there are so many more children that go see it, and children's tickets are usually around $2 or so cheaper nowadays than the same adult ticket. It also means that when you see movies like Minions: The Rise of Gru, you're far more likely to have more of the audiences show up in the daytime when tickets are already cheaper. In addition to having more children's tickets, it drives the averages down. Black Panther is going to be on the other side of that average, the other side of that bell curve, where they're going to be much higher than the average ticket price. So realistically, what we're looking at is an average ticket price for Black Panther 2: Wakanda Forever somewhere around 30 to maybe even 35% higher than 2018's original Black Panther. Now, if you recall, at the beginning of this piece, what did they claim was going to be the box office opening weekend of around $200 million, was it not? Well, if we actually look at the $200 million from 2018's first Black Panther movie, we would have to adjust that up by 30 to 35% to come to an equal figure based on today's ticket prices. That means that Black Panther 2 would have to get somewhere in the neighborhood of $260 to $270 million of an opening weekend to pace with inflation the movie from 4 years ago. That's not likely to happen. Nobody is projecting that. As a matter of fact, I think the $200 million that they're projecting currently from Box Office Pro is going to be high. And even the article mentions the obvious from the piece, while respectfully considering the death of Chadwick Boseman, that is ultimately an element that is challenging to define in forecasting models from an objective standpoint. Unlike the loss of Heath Ledger and Paul Walker before their final major roles in The Dark Knight and The Fast and the Furious 7, Chadwick Boseman will not appear in this film. Those aforementioned event-level franchise performers attracted beyond their core audiences to generate series-best box office earnings. Since it can be argued the first Black Panther already achieved that, expecting an even larger performance for this sequel based on those histories doesn't make for an apples-to-apples comparison. With the intense interest expected to drive upfront business, a more front-loaded run for this sequel relative to the first Panther is more likely. And that front-loaded box office is exactly what has been rather punitive for Marvel since Phase 4 began. We've talked about it many times with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness and Thor: Love and Thunder now. I don't think Black Panther is going to be any different. In fact, I believe that the more front-loaded that this movie is, in other words, the bigger an opening weekend that Black Panther: Wakanda Forever has, the more heavily front-loaded this film is going to be. I think the legs will shrink accordingly. Just like we saw with Doctor Strange that barely topped a 2x with a $187 million opening weekend versus Thor: Love and Thunder, which finished with about a 2.5x run with about $40 million less on opening weekend than Doctor Strange. Everything seems to kind of work out to around the same mathematical ranges. I don't think Black Panther's any different. If it blows the doors off with $200 million, I don't even know if it will make a 2x, which means that it will still finish under $400 million. But what do the projections from Box Office Pro say right now? So now that we have it, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. The first week we've had a forecast for this film with a $180 to $225 million opening weekend, according to the metrics that they're observing now, using their own internal algorithms that they have been using to project all of the films thus far. This puts it, according to their metrics, between $445 and $590 million total domestic run. That actually puts it right at around a 2.5x runoff. But I just don't think I can agree with Box Office on that one when it comes to having an opening weekend that big. But again, this is all based on very, very early interest and early ticket pre-sales. Yes, I'm sure that for a certain group of folks out there that may be very, very big Black Panther fans or really want to see the film, or fans that have been energized to go support the film because of Chadwick Boseman's untimely passing and unfortunate passing, that he wasn't able to be part of this film, that may drive some of that, but there's probably a limited amount of that in scope. And the big problem is, or the big issue is, with all these Marvel films is that what happens after opening weekend, meaning our audience is going to show up and fall in love with this film and drive more traffic to it and repeat business to it, or is it going to wind up being like the last few entries that were made and distributed by Walt Disney Studios, to where people have gone to see them and have not had that many great things to say about it, or say it was mediocre at best, or in many cases where many people said it was just a plain bad movie. Word of mouth will either make or break a movie. We saw what it looks like when it makes a film when Top Gun Maverick came out. I do not expect Black Panther 2 to come anywhere close to reaching the domestic haul of Top Gun Maverick. And quite frankly, I don't expect Avatar 2: The Way of the Water to do it either. Now, as a reminder about some previous projections from Box Office Pro, let's look at Thor: Love and Thunder. On June 9th, about 1 month before the movie came out on July 8th, Box Office Pro was projecting a $155 to $205 million opening weekend, with the mean in there being around $180 million. And the total domestic box office would land somewhere between $350 to $495 million. But the reality was something very different. Thor: Love and Thunder finished with $343 million domestic, below even the lowest projection of that initial forecast. And the opening weekend was only $144 million, not even the bare minimum of $155 that was initially thought. And for an even more egregious miss from Box Office Pro, weekend box office forecast for Pixar's Lightyear back on June 15th. This was just before the movie came out, days before the movie came out. What was their forecast for Lightyear? The 3-day weekend forecast for Disney Pixar's Lightyear was $84 million. Lightyear finished its entire box office run with only a $118 million till domestically, with a pathetic $50 million opening weekend. Now, to be fair, they got pretty close with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, projecting a $190 million opening weekend just about 2 to 3 weeks before the movie actually did. The movie opened with $187 million, still falling below the bottom end of that projection, but it did a much better job, although the domestic total low-high range of $450 to $560 was definitely way above where it wound up, as the movie barely limped past the $400 million mark. And I use the word limped only in the sense that the leg out for that film was relatively poor compared to most of the previous Marvel entries. And while, yes, it did make money, it didn't cross the $1 billion mark, the very coveted $1 billion mark that Disney was hoping that it would. And I'm sure Disney was hoping that Thor: Love and Thunder would, although it came nowhere close. In fact, it landed at $750 million worldwide, which is pretty much exactly what I predicted before its opening weekend. Now, the real issue is, where will Black Panther fall? If the projections turn to be overblown, like Lightyear, or like Thor: Love and Thunder, then the real opening weekend figure for Black Panther 2, Wakanda Forever, is probably going to be much closer to about $160 million to $180 million. Not the 205 or the 180 at the low end. I think 180 is going to be at the very upper end of this, and we'll be watching these long-range forecasts as the next 3 weeks go by as we approach the release of the film, because as we've seen, they will adjust these figures week to week based on subsequent performance of ticket pre-sales. There's also the assumption of a lot more walk-up traffic than Marvel has been getting of late, and I think that's affecting things very much as well. But stay tuned. We'll keep up to date on this. Make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and do leave a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts on what you think Black Panther 2, Wakanda Forever is going to do at the theaters. And until next time, take care.